Recording in progress. Okay, so book 9 is really the juiciest section of the entire text, and he particularly is concerned with real world relationships. If you think about these three types of relationship, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and Carrie, I got you. Um, uh, they're really just generic. They're categories. They're just like conceptual analyses of the types of relationships that can be had, and they're kind of in the abstract. They're generic. But in book 9, he turns to real world relationships and the complications that emerge from them that start to complicate those simple three categories that he's given us, and they start to look like real life because we realize that those three categories can be intermingled. We realize that there are other issues involved. If those three categories are based on different objects of exchange, we realize that at different times in relationships, we can be giving and receiving different objects of exchange. And there's also, he's going to introduce the matter of perception and reality, of perception and reality. And this is the real world, right? So he said something that's very striking in book 8. The desire for friendship arises quickly, but the reality of it does not. The desire for friendship arises quickly, but the reality of it does not. And there's many reasons why it doesn't. Number one is just circumstance. You're thrown in a situation where you just don't have access to people where you form uh, strong bonds or great intimacy or great loyalty and trust, right? Then the other issue is the reason it doesn't happen immediately is because his understanding of friendship, we notice that there's only one form of true friendship, and he calls that complete friendship, right? And how long does it take to become complete friends with somebody? He doesn't give a time specifically, but generally speaking, how long does it take to become complete friends with someone?
I think 7 years. I think that's like the believable. It's like if you know somebody, if you're friends with somebody for 7 years, they're like a real genuine friend, and it's gonna be for lifetime.
Yeah, I
Like
mean, I
I don't
don't
know,
think
related to
he
the
doesn't
story,
he
in
doesn't
relation
give
to
a number,
the yeah,
but
Or
does it take
start from childhood.
does it take
yeah,
a short time or a long time? Let's put it
it
that
takes a
way.
long time. Yeah, it
It
takes a long
takes a
time.
long time. And then the question is, why does it take a long time to establish true, let's just call it true friendship? Why does it take so long? What are some of the reasons that he gives? He mentions issues, and it turns out that these are the reasons why it takes a long time. Remember, the desire for friendship arises quickly, but the reality of it does not happen quickly.
That's because you have to read a person out, get to know them get to know a friend. In order for you to call a person your friend, you have to really know them, get to know their ins and
Yes.
outs. Just to say that you are a friend just because we known each other for 2 weeks, that's not long enough to know somebody.
Yeah.
You have
And
to,
keep going.
yeah.
Keep going. Yep. Perfect. Knowledge.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Knowledge. Right. So for him, um, let's put it this way: knowing someone is loving them, and there's many reasons for this. You might raise the question. So remember that this word philia, the Greek word for that's being translated as friendship, also means love. So it's an intense bond of intimacy, of comradeship, of solidarity. It's not necessarily erotic love, although erotic love, sexual love could be involved in it, but it particularly connotes a certain type of relationship, right? And it takes a long time to get to know someone. How can you love someone if you don't know them? What you're saying is, I don't really know what I'm loving. I don't even know the object of desire that I'm giving my love to. So you keep, if you've just met someone, this is why like instant romance doesn't work. If you've just met someone and you say, I love you, well, you might love something, but it's not that person because you don't know them from what is the expression? You don't know them from a hole in the wall. You don't.
Yeah.
I can't remember what a
Hole
hole in the
in
wall.
the
Good,
wall.
good. It sounded so strange. It didn't seem right. You don't know them, so it's not them that you really love. It's a feeling you're projecting on them, and it's coming from you, right? So you can't love them until you actually know them, right? Because you don't know what you're loving if you don't have knowledge of them. And then the other thing that arises is that your appreciation of them comes from actually getting to know what they're about. And of course, this takes time. And the other facet of it is if you're willing to invest, loving them is knowing them, but knowing them is also loving them. That expression goes both ways. So you can't love them unless you know them, but also you can't know them unless you have some kind of feeling for them. If you think about what it takes to really know a person, it does. So now I'm gonna contradict myself a little bit and say there has to be some goodwill there. There has to be some impetus to want to get to know them in the first place, right? And you don't have the same impetus to want to get to know every person because you're not interested in finding out about them. And so if you're willing to get to know them, if you're willing to spend the time, that shows a kind of level of commitment to the other person, because you're not going to get to know other people because you don't have the motivation to do it, right? So getting to really know someone implies motivation. So, and then there's an interesting catch with knowledge. There's an interesting catch. What you're going to find out about that person is going to be both positive and negative, right?
Yes.
Just by definition, the more you get to know someone, the more skeletons you're going to find. And I'm not necessarily talking about anything terrible, but everybody's got issues. Everybody's got, we call it baggage, right? There's going to be something that they've avoided talking about. They didn't talk about it on the first date. They didn't talk about it on the third date, or they didn't, and it may take a long time for it to finally come out. So this is one of the great ambiguities about knowledge. Knowledge is going to breed familiarity, and familiarity is going to breed not contempt in most cases, but familiarity is going to breed connection, right? So uh so knowledge cuts both ways, and of course they're going to do the same to you. um so Humian, I'm trying to read what you're saying. Would you say that also applies to people who believe they're
Like they're
good?
doing good. So like you know how like people could believe like, oh, I'm in love with this person, but it could just be like infatuation, or like, they don't really, like as you're saying, they don't really know them. So they're just like, they're pulling on the fact that like, oh, I'm attracted, and I guess like, I feel a little bit happy. So like would you
Okay,
say
so
because
so I mean, Aristotle, he doesn't spell it out explicitly, but he's dealt with this issue of infatuation in two different ways. Number one, exactly, an infatuation is your perception of the person, and I think what you're infatuated with is not the person themselves,
yeah,
because you
the
don't.
idea.
Aristotle's claim is you don't know the person themselves. What you're infatuated with are things that probably give you pleasure. So the infatuation angle is basically some version. Now these categories, you got to kind of flesh them out, and that he gives you a basic skeleton to work with. Then you have to fill in the real world details. So, I mean, infatuation is basically pleasure. Obviously, if you're infatuated, you feel good. You're getting some kind of emotional pleasure, right? He's not going to deny that, but he's going to say it's not really about the other person in terms of, this is the key thing, in terms of who they actually are. But
So
they are doing something, maybe they're attractive, maybe the way they act, they're just generating a response in you that's pleasurable. But that's something different from you knowing them and you being concerned for them precisely because you know their character. So you have to understand Aristotle makes a really interesting distinction between the character and kind of the self of the other person versus like effects that they produce in you, right? So
That's what I was relating to good, like people doing good for the sake of like, it's honestly not, it could be both that, you know, they're either out of fear or like to feel good, like, you know, like it's just for that reason, like, oh, to make themselves like think like, oh, I'm a good person. Like, you know, some people like will donate after they did something terrible or made someone feel terrible, you know, just to, and in that mindset, like I remember reading like it's like people that are truly good are the ones that could do bad, but like they constantly check themselves. And he talks about that too, like, you know, the people that are like really like self-lovers are like people that are moderate and like looking like constantly reflecting on their behaviors and stuff.
okay, good. So you're getting to the issue of self-love, which is what we're going to finish with. So let me just make a few more points and then we'll jump into things. So friendship, the desire for friendship arises quickly, but the reality does not. And we've just explained, we've talked about exactly why that is, right? And it's a reality. We don't need to explain why we all desire friendship immediately. We all want instant gratification. That's kind of like the way the human being is built in a lot of ways. And we also kind of know that anything worth having never gets gratified instantly. It's always work. And partly what gives value to the thing that you're after is precisely that it's not easy to get, right? Because it's rare. Complete friendship is rare. But the problem that's going to arise is that we're going to desire friendship, but it's not going to be there. We're going to want to see friendship when it's not there. We're going to be willing to deceive not other people sometimes, but we're going to be willing to deceive ourselves about the existence of a friendship that's not really there. And I suppose everybody knows a story of, you know, one person chasing the other, where the person being chased is a little cooler than the person chasing, and the person who's chasing thinks that, you know, they're all in love and everything's perfect, and the other person is just as interested in they are. And then they have a bitter reality check where whatever happens, whatever blows up, and they realize that what they hoped was there was not in fact there. um, I mean, there's millions of versions of that kind of story. Okay, so business stuff. Next week we're gonna look at the symposium, and for the homework, I'm really going to select out this. I want you to read the whole thing. It's really not that long. It's a fun read, but we're going to focus in on certain speeches for the homework. So when we come in, we can't look at the whole text. We're going to focus on the introduction, the introductory scene, I should say, and then certain key speeches that most directly relate to our purposes. Just remember that when you read the symposium, to read the introduction, Among other things, one of the key things to be found in that introduction is a discussion of the relationship between the lover and the beloved. The lover and the beloved. In the symposium, the central theme of the symposium is something called eros. So in all Plato, it's one of Plato's dialogues. We read a little bit of the Republic. The Republic deals with the question essentially of what is justice. In the symposium, the main theme is not justice. It's this thing called eros. And of course, the word eros is where we get our word erotic or erotic love. And for the Greeks, eros on the most basic level means, well, it actually is two things. There's a god called Eros, and he's our version of Cupid, right? So Cupid, I think, is just a Latin word for the Greek eros, like cupidity is a certain type of feeling or vice as well. So eros, it creates relationships, and eros means desire. And typically it means like erotic desire, but it's not necessarily sexual. We'll talk about this next week and you'll see it in the videos and so on and so forth. but there's an important distinction. The word philia can be translated as love. The word eros can be translated as love, but philia refers to a relationship between two human beings, whereas eros refers to desire that might create a relationship. And it's an important distinction. And while philia is this kind of comradeship and intimacy that might involve sex, eros refers to a kind of excessively intense feeling of desire. And it could be for another person, but it doesn't have to be. It could be for, you could have an erotic desire. It sounds strange, but this is the full meaning of it. You could have a erotic desire for drinking. You could have an erotic desire for, whatever it may be. And you could also have it for a human being. And in the kind of typical sense in the Greeks, erotic desire did mean sexual desire, but it's not confined to just sexual desire. It's just a kind of extremely powerful and intense desire. So you might say that between the ethics and the symposium, you have a discussion on one hand of friendship and on the other of love. And of course, the boundaries between love and friendship are not absolute. They're slippery, which is part of the problem for human beings, theoretically and practically, we might say. So today, in just a minute, what I want to do is review some things Aristotle has to say about human nature, happiness, and friendship, and particularly, what is the connection between these things? What is the connection? What role does friendship play in our happiness? That we need to clarify. And it seems that complete friendship is going to be the one that contributes to our happiness. And the question is exactly how. And I think when we look at book 9, we'll see that pretty clearly. Then I want to just review the 3 types of friendships, and we'll look at a chart where we'll kind of fill in things. And then we'll look at book 9. So without further ado, I want to run through a few things here that we haven't talked about explicitly. So Aristotle's conception of human happiness starts with human nature. He says in book 1, chapter 7, that if I can establish what is distinctly human in human nature, I will then be able to clarify what human happiness is. Because happiness is a kind of state of existence that's distinct for human beings as opposed to other animals. So the important thing he starts to talk about is that a human being, its nature, our nature, consists of a body and a soul, right? And the body is the physical part, and the soul is this kind of invisible thing that can't exist without the body, but it's somehow something slightly more than our physical existence. So for example, the soul marks off our psychological existence of our heart and mind. So when we talk about ourselves, we still use this kind of metaphorical language of our heart and mind as comprising us, right? And when we use our word heart, we don't literally mean the heart beating in our chest exactly. We mean something to do with our emotional life and our emotional identity, right? So, and Aristotle uses the word soul. We might use the word self. And the point is, we identify ourself as the primary thing that we are. Like if you say, "Who am I?" or "What am I?" I'm myself. However you describe what that is. And the key point is that yourself is something more than just your physical body. Yourself is something that you do with your mind and your body, with your brain and your body. And it's this kind of immaterial, intangible, psychological reality that is you. That's something more than just, it's like you're more than the sum of your parts. You're something more than just your body. So in Greek, the word for soul is psyche. And that's where we get the word psychology. Psychology is just the science of soul. Science of the soul today. It's same thing. They just wouldn't use the word soul because soul sounds kind of old fashioned. So in Latin, the Latin word for soul is anima, and that's where we get our word animate or animated. So for the Greeks and in the ancient world generally, anything with a soul was something that was alive rather than dead. And the soul was the thing that gave something life, made it animate rather than inanimate. So if you think of the story in Genesis 2, where Adam gets the breath of God in his nostrils, and he comes to life, kind of like Frankenstein. He's being made animate. The clay or the dirt the dust that he's made from, God brings to life. He animates him, right? He moves and he lives. So the key thing, obviously, we're alive, but what really matters is not just that we're alive, but the type of life we live as human beings. We don't merely live an animal existence, we live a distinctly human existence for Aristotle. And our human existence defined by the use of our reason. We don't just have an animal soul, we have a rational soul. And Aristotle calls this the zoon logikon, which means the rational or speaking animal, from the word logos, right? And because we're the speaking and rational animal, we're also the political animal. If you all remember a long time ago now, that the polis was defined by people coming together and speaking and using their speaking and reasoning skills to decide how they were going to live collectively, make choices, to deliberate about the laws that they were going to make based on their own conception of happiness, right? And we saw that political science, for example, was the science of the happiness of the political community or the polis or the city rather than the individual. So ethics, of course, is the science of the happiness of the individual. And that's why we're looking at this kind of, if politics is a kind of Google Earth view, ethics is a kind of Google Street view, where we're down looking from the first person point of view on things. So the key thing is, for Aristotle, the nature of anything, it's going to get a little technical for a second. The nature of anything has three components. It has an ergon, it has a telos, and it has a virtue. Arete, I should have written that here. Arete means virtue. What is happy? What is happiness again? What's the definition Aristotle gives of happiness? The simple definition, a kind of bumper sticker to it. What's the bumper sticker definition of happiness for Aristotle? Yeah, living well.
A virtuous life.
Yeah. He says activity in accord with virtue. His very technical way of saying living virtuously or living well. And living well, let's be clear, implies living virtuously. So this word here, arete, A-R-E-T-E, means virtue. And the most basic meaning of virtue is actually excellence, right? So when he says happiness is living virtuously, what he's actually saying is happiness is living excellently. Now, what does it mean to live excellently? It means to fulfill your nature as a human being. And the primary attribute of your nature is not your body or not your emotions, it's your reason. So the full use of your reason results in living excellently as a human being. And this is exactly why he chooses the intellectual virtues and ultimately contemplation as the highest form of happiness, because this for him, agree or disagree, this for him is the fullest, most complete use of our reason. And he would say it's the superior use of our reason. And it's the superior life, precisely because it's the most distinctly human, because human nature is defined by its capacity for reasoning. To the extent that, for Aristotle, he's rather cruel, to the extent that you're not reasoning in the ways he describes in terms of, remember, moral virtue and intellectual virtue both involve reasoning. Moral virtue involves practical reasoning about making prudent choices in the world, actions, because choices result in actions. And then intellectual virtue involves the use of intellectual reason in the service of knowledge and understanding about the world. So intellectual virtues are about understanding the world. Practical or moral virtues are about performing deeds in the right way based on the right thinking. right? Okay, to the extent that you're not using your reason, you're just acting like an animal, like any other animal, I should say. Okay, so the nature of the human being, like for everything, Aristotle has the same conception of the nature of a thing. It has a telos, an ergon, and an excellence or arete. So the telos is the purpose of the thing, the purpose, right? The ergon is the function of the thing, and the arete is the excellence that allows the thing to perform its function well, right? So our function, let's just take the knife. So here's the nature of a knife. It's telos. That means its end, its goal. What's the goal? The knife wakes up in the morning and say, my goal in life is to cut things. And I don't want to just cut things. I want to cut them well, right? Because nobody just wants to go through the motions. You don't want to just do it. You don't want to just live and then die. You want to live well and then die, because you're going to die anyway. Nothing we can do about that, right? So the knife wakes up and says, my purpose in life is to cut. And therefore my function, you see, it's very closely related. My function is cutting. That's what I do. But notice the difference. The function is cutting, but the telos is to actually cut the thing, right? It's like I can try to perform my function, but not succeed at my task, right? And then excellence is just the how well you perform your function in order to complete your goal. And you know you've done something well or excellently or virtuously if you've completed your goal in the right way, right? So you could think of the excellence of the knife as the sharpness of it, which is the gives it the ability to cut well, right? So the human being, it's rather abstract, but let's keep it simple, right? The goal of the human being is to live virtuously, which is another word for happiness. And to live virtuously really means to live rationally, because your primary function is your capacity to reason. And of course, Aristotle shows in book 6 that there are a whole range of types of reasoning involved in life, not just book learning, right? So our goal is to live rationally. And when we reason excellently, we're going to achieve our goal. We're going to achieve happiness. And this actually comes back to him saying things like the polis is the authoritative community that provides for all the needs of human life, both mere life and the good life. And what he was really talking about, the city has all the different institutions, it has education, it has economy, it has all the things that can cultivate a human being and make them as excellent as is possible. Okay. So here you just have a little image for Aristotle. Our nature is developmental. We start out at our birth and we try to achieve our goal. So I've got the goal is like the target that you're aiming at with your bow and arrow. And this line just suggests our course of life as we act in life, and that we're trying to achieve this goal. This isn't death here. This is the achievement of our goal. Okay, so one more important thing. Aristotle's understanding of the soul. This is something somebody mentioned last class, and we didn't really get into detail. But this is really crucial to understand his the two forms of self-love, right? Because we discover there's a good kind of self-love and there's a bad kind of self-love. So Aristotle understands the soul as being divided against itself in two parts. There's a rational part, which is our reason, and then there's a non-rational part, not irrational, just non-rational, which are our passions, our emotions, our impulses, our instincts. So I'm going to use the word passions to just talk about all those emotions that motivate us to do all kinds of stuff. And of course, those passions, those emotions, Aristotle and the Greeks, they understand that these are the things we hold in common with other animals. right? We have impulses just like they do. Impulses starting with things like food, sex, drink, sleep, warmth, all that stuff. And then we get more sophisticated passions that go beyond that. Social passions, like we desire recognition from other people. He's going to say that's an animal impulse, because you see that in animals all the time. You think of the ape that like beats its chest, looking for recognition from other people. Okay, so a, a virtuous life, living rationally, for Aristotle and the Greeks, requires that your reason rules over your soul and regulates your passions, right? Passions are impulses. The passions are not necessarily bad. So when he criticizes, for example, the life of pleasure or friendship based on pleasure, he's not saying that it's wrong. He's not saying that it's bad. He's not saying that it's fallen and sinful. He says nothing of the sort. He's only saying don't mistake pleasure for the highest. Uh, don't mistake physical pleasure for the highest form of human existence, or don't mistake physical pleasure for the highest human pleasure we might experience. Right? That's all he's really saying. He's saying there's a hierarchy there, and it maps onto this hierarchy of the soul with reason at the top and appetite. I'll skip the Greek words, but appetite and spirit at the bottom. And these are two passions that are the same as in other animals. So appetite means bodily appetite. Like I have a desire, people have a desire for food, drink, sex, sleep, so on and so forth. And the interesting thing about appetite is it's a desire for things you need. The appetites of the body keep you alive. When you have that impulse to eat, it's because, well, you're hungry and your body needs energy to sustain itself. When you're in the desert and you're thirsty, well, that's a good desire, because that desire is going to keep you alive. It's going to motivate you to find some water, that oasis in the middle of the desert. But appetite also deals with things that are not necessarily needs. Like it just has to do with things that are pleasurable, because a cool drink of water in the desert is going to be pleasurable, but so is smoking a joint or drinking a 6-pack of beer. So there are things that can be harmful that are also pleasurable, which is, one of the complications of human existence. So bodily appetites. And so, for example, the people who think that happiness is the life of bodily pleasure, well, why do they think that? Aristotle's model here is just going to say, well, that's because those people are driven by their bodily appetites first and foremost. They should be motivated by their reason. Their reason should guide their actions, but it doesn't for whatever reason. And therefore, they're guided by their bodily appetites. Okay, spirit or thumos is a kind of a moral emotion and a social emotion that demands recognition of the world. It's a kind of self-assertiveness, spiritedness. So if you think of like someone plays football in a spirited way, or you have a school spirit, like a pep rally. I know it's so hokey sounding, pep rallies. But people get excited, people get motivated. And it's something that almost borders on anger, but it's not necessarily negative. It has a certain type of aggressive quality to it. So if you think about what gets people, a question, what causes human beings to get angry? Without giving a specific example, what causes people to get angry? Because thumos or spirit is connected with anger. What makes people angry? I think there is one single explanation that applies to like every instance. And it has to do with disappointment. It's connected with disappointment. And frustration and expectations. When you do something, whatever it is, what do you have the expectation of? Yes. So Diego said it. You hope that everything you do succeeds. I think the basic model of anger is that when you fail, when the world or another person doesn't recognize your will, when the world doesn't recognize that I want this to happen, you get angry, right? When you say, please do this, and the other person doesn't do it, they've not respected your will, right? We have a sense of self-worth, right? And this emotion is connected in our relationships with other people in the world. And when our will is satisfied by the world, when the world capitulates to what we want, we have a sense of self-worth. It makes us feel bigger. If you think about the successful person, especially as they're portrayed, say, in our popular culture, it seems to be the person who's driving down the street and every light is green for them. It's like whenever they face a challenge, it always goes in the right way. And the world just kind of lays down before them and they succeed. Of course, you don't see all the struggle that they went through to get where they are. You just see them on TV acting really, really hip. But so when the light turns red in life, we get pissed off because we want it to be green. And when it turns red, it's a kind of a put down, right? It's like the world's not giving us our props. It's not recognizing who am I? I'm the person that everything should go right for, right? So you get frustrated and you get angry. And particularly Thumos desires recognition. And recognition is a form of honor. I want people to pay attention to me. A question: why do we want people to pay attention to us in whatever way it happens to be? What is it about that relation that is satisfying for us? It's gratifying, but gratifying how? I agree.
We want other people to see us as we are, the way we love ourselves. We want other people to love.
Okay, that's perfect. We want other people to love us the way we love ourselves. We want other people to see in us what we see in ourselves. Let me just put it one other way. We have a sense of esteem of ourselves. Remember self-esteem? Oh, Johnny, that's so wonderful. We're going to build up your self-esteem. You're going to get a participation trophy or something like that. My daughter played soccer last soccer season, and she actually got a participation trophy. I played sports forever and ever as a kid. Never once did I get a participation trophy. And I feel rather awkward she got one because everybody else got one too. So esteem, we want other people to, what is esteem about? What is esteem about? Can anyone give a synonym for esteem? This is a really important emotion, thumos, because it's a social emotion. It has immediate impact on our relationship with others, and it brings us together in connection with others. What's another word for esteem? To say that someone has self-esteem, what do they have?
Self-respect.
Self-respect, that's a good synonym. What else? So we want other people to respect us. We want RESPECT, right? Just like that song says. That's what this song is all about. Aretha Franklin gets there, and she doesn't just ask for respect, she demands it. Because you ask, could you please respect me? I said, get out of here, right? You want respect, you have to put your foot down. Okay, great. Dignity. What's dignity? Self-esteem has to do with self-respect and dignity, a good word. What is dignity? Any other synonyms we can come up with for self-esteem?
Self-worth.
Good. I think, yeah, pride, confidence, all these things play into it. I think worth is really the word that really gets at the issue. All these other words are very important, but worth has to do with how much we value ourselves, right? We put it in that context. We give ourselves a lot of value, and we want other people to recognize that in us. And of course, that's a central part of all relationships all the time. The moment you don't feel respected by the other person, it's a problem. Well, everybody responds differently, but it's one of the things that people give, right? In the exchange, they show respect for you or they fail to show respect for you. And of course, real relationships on a daily basis, like it doesn't just magically happen. There's always a little bit of a tussle that goes on. Okay. And then we got reason, right? And the model of the soul here, let me just go down one very quickly, is that these thumos and epithumia, or spirit and appetite, they're passions. And what's the problem with passions for Aristotle? Aristotle is not against passions. He has no problem with them. There's one problem with passions, though. He has no intrinsic problem with them. The one problem is the passions are blind, right? You heard the expression like a blind fool, or someone blinded by their passions, blinded by their impulses. The problem of passions is that they're animal impulses that don't take into consideration the consequences of them being fulfilled, right? So an impulse is something that your psyche wants, but in wanting it, the passion doesn't recognize whether that object of desire is good or bad or what have you, right? All your psyche knows is that you want it, right? So what reason does, reason you might say is like the lookout, like the watch person of the soul. The reason steps in to make a judgment about what might be the right thing to do, right? First of all, you see that there's three parts of the soul: reason, spirit, and appetite. And it suggests one big problem for a human being. Instead of having a singular source of motivation, we've got three sources. These aren't like three different parts of your brain. Rather, these are three different types of motivations that can be in conflict with one another. I take it everybody's been in a situation where you weren't sure what to do, precisely because on one hand, I wanted to do this, and on another hand, I wanted to do that. And that instance where you realize that your own motivations, your choice is being pulled in different directions. On one hand, I want to satisfy this principle. On the other hand, I'd really like to do that, right? That's when you realize you have competing sources of motivation within you. And what reason does, it allows to foresee consequences of actions, right? So, I don't know. I want a beer, but the last time I had a beer, I had six, and six turned out to be too many because I didn't wake up the next day until the middle of the day, and I missed work or something, whatever it is. And reason says, yeah, you can satisfy the passion, you just can't satisfy it that much, right? So the model here of the virtuous person, right? Life is living virtuously. Happiness is living virtuously. For Aristotle, the virtuous person is one that has reason regulating the soul. Or as he would say, reason is the master and the passions are the slave, because the passions submit to what reason thinks is the right thing to do, because reason is the part of the soul that can actually judge what the right thing to do is. And practical reasoning is all about reasoning involved in making good judgments about one's life relative to the various types of moral virtue, right? So here's a really simple analysis for Aristotle. The virtuous person, the good person, the righteous person, the excellent person, those are all synonyms. They have reason ruling in their soul, right? The person who is not virtuous, the person who is not noble, who is base, they have their passions ruling in their soul rather than reason. And what would Aristotle call that? And others did call it. They call it person who is a slave to their passions, a slave to their passions. What is a slave? Can anyone give me a quick definition of what a slave is, as opposed to a free person? Let me put it this way. Does a slave make their own choices?
No.
No, right? And what is the essence of a distinctly human life rather than the life of a slave, which is the antithesis of a human life? Human beings have reason. Reason allows them to make choices. And the person who is a slave to their passions has kind of abdicated their role of making choices, and they've given up that role, given up that authority to their passions, and the passions are dictating. And when the passions are dictating, they're not freely choosing, but they're enslaved to their impulses, right? Okay, this is going to be really important when Aristotle talks about self-love. Really important. Okay, very quickly. So you'll notice something really interesting. Aristotle opens up in book 1, chapter 5. He talks about the 3 lives. He says there are 3 authoritative opinions in the city about what people think happiness is. And the 3 opinions he gives are the life of pleasure, the life of politics, and then the contemplative life. Now, what's really interesting is that these 3 lives, they map on to the 3 parts of the soul. The person who pursues the life of pleasure is a slave to their bodily appetites. Very simply, the person who pursues the life of politics, which in the ethics, he has a lot of negative things to say compared to the politics. In the politics, political life is kind of the ultimate end of collective life. But in the ethics, he's critical. So the life of politics for him, he describes as the life of honors. And of course, that's the life of spirit, because spirit pursues recognition. I want to be recognized by others. And if you remember in book 1, he says the problem of pursuing recognition as happiness is that on one day, everybody loves you, and the next day they're gone. And happiness is something that you have in your control and when it's recognition, you're at the mercy of your audience. You're at the mercy of your audience. And then reason doesn't just choose what the right thing to do is, but it also has understanding, and its object of desire is knowledge and understanding. So therefore, the person who pursues the life of contemplation, aka philosophy, it's what he's really talking about, is the person driven by their reason, the intellectual use of their reason. And the highest virtue he describes as theoria. And that's where we get our word theory, right? And what it literally means is theoria means contemplation, contemplation of the nature of the universe, the big questions in life, the kinds of things that you'd expect philosophy to think about. Okay, let me just run through this very quickly. You'll notice that while it's not perfectly identical, you've got the 3 parts of the soul and the 3 lives that are parallel. And then if you think of the three forms of friendship, they're very similar. They have a lot of connections between them. Happiness. Happiness is just a quick review here. Happiness is activity of soul in accord with reason, right? And we discovered that there are 2 types of virtue, moral and intellectual. Which one does Aristotle think is superior, the moral or the intellectual?
Intellectual.
Okay, intellectual. And then of the intellectual virtues, he says this virtue called contemplation is the very highest. Good. And therefore, a life driven by contemplation for Aristotle, maybe not for us, is the highest form of existence. But he says you also need a complete life. What does a complete life consist of?
Right, like you put the complete friendship, the three things that we discussed.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm distracted, but we discussed 3 things. I can't think of it right now, but
yeah, so the word complete
the
is just
good.
as significant. Absolutely. So it has to do with something that's comprehensive. It has all the complete means something like it has all the things that are necessary for.
The good, the pleasant, and the useful.
Okay, that's a little different. See, those are the things involved in the complete friendship. And this is a complete life where it's the same idea is at work, but the things that comprise it are a little different. How long do you have to live to be happy? What does Aristotle say?
I'm guessing a long time.
Well, you shouldn't have to guess, but yes, a long time. So part of a complete life, I'm just using the word duration, time. You have to live for a long time. And why is this? Because the person who's going to be considered happy is the virtuous person. But you don't get to be virtuous by being virtuous one day. You don't get to the Hall of Fame as an NFL player by having one MVP year. You got to do it day in and day out, year after year, right? So everybody can have one good day or one good week or one good year, but it's about the consistency and the length of the consistency, right? And then the other thing is, he says, complete life involves not time, but stuff. You need a basics, really, he calls external goods. And part of it, and he calls it equipment. And equipment almost sounds like instrument. It's like stuff you use to accomplish things, right? Um, and the first things he's thinking about are things like wealth. And he doesn't necessarily mean great riches when he uses the word wealth. He just means a solid financial base where you're not desperately in search of getting the very, very basic rudimentary needs of life, right? I don't know if anyone's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy of life where the first things you satisfy are your material needs. And once you have those in place, you can start to get to higher level needs like emotional needs. But if you don't have the basic needs in place, those are like the building blocks to get to the higher ones. And if the building blocks aren't in place, it's hard to be taking care of the higher ones because you're worrying about the ones at the bottom. And of course, that's a problem for all of us. We're all working for the man, so we can't. We don't have time to tend our souls all day. We have to tend our bodies and our wallets, our bank accounts, and so on. So it's a complicated world. But then he also refers to friends and allies as part of this equipment that contributes to our well-being. And so this comes back to the question of how friendship contributes to our happiness. Let's move forward. Just remember the series of preconditions for human interaction or human social existence. It starts with need, the lack of self-sufficiency, which is to say our lives generate desires our lives generate needs that we can't satisfy by ourselves, right? Human beings in a sense are partial in that we have desires and needs that can only be fulfilled by the help of others, right? Therefore, we're automatically thrown into relationships of one kind or another, based on the needs and desires, because we need others to help us to satisfy those needs and desires. And that's just the nature of human existence. And it's one of the most basic reasons why we are social animals, right? And political, but social. If we're going to engage with people, we need a basic level of goodwill. And don't be confused when Aristotle speaks about goodwill. He's not talking about some like great self-sacrifice or some Christian charity. He's just talking about we need to be reasonably trusting of the other person. We need to be kind of optimistic in our interactions that allow us to engage with the other person. Like when you go to Starbucks, or I go to Starbucks and I want to buy that coffee and I tell them that I'd like X. I actually, I have the positive, hope that they're actually going to, fulfill my request. And they have the positive hope that when they give me the coffee, I'm not just gonna run off without paying. Right. So goodwill is a kind of really basic level of societal trust that allows society to work at all. Right. So if you think about Hobbes for a second, remember Hobbes, there is no trust in the world of Hobbes. And therefore, because there's no trust, everybody's at each other's throats. in that war of all against all. We've got reciprocity. The next thing, exchange of goods. So every relationship consists of an exchange of goods of one kind or another. And somebody mentioned the three goods that get exchanged. Reciprocity of exchange. What is reciprocity all about? When people act reciprocally in exchange.
Like even exchange.
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Even. Yeah, so that's a good point. Exchange has to be effectively even or in a certain way equal.
So you pretty much get back what you're giving.
Yeah, so exchange has to be like a tit for tat. You get this and I get that. I give you this and you give me that. If I'm the only one giving and ain't nothing coming back, either I'm getting screwed over and I don't realize it, or the relationship ends. So in book 9, it gets interesting because we discover there are people who give and are thinking they're getting something in return when they're not, but it takes them a while to realize it. And I suppose everybody's been in a relationship of whatever kind where they were giving whatever it was they were giving, thinking they were going to get something back and it wasn't coming. And they kept looking at their watch saying it's going to come sooner or later. And it never shows up. And it takes you and you're the last person to realize it. Something like that. So equality, and equality has two factors. There's equality in complete friendship, for example, of virtue, like it's two good people. So therefore they're equal in that way. Or it could be equality of stature. We talked about like Barack Obama is not going to be coming over to our house to hang out with us because we're not equals with him. If we were Richard Branson or Tom Hanks or I don't know who else is a good one. We could call him up and say, yo, Barack, why don't you come over and let's hang out and we'll have a scotch or something. And he might come over. But with us, we're little with the little people because we are in a different status than he is. And you know, it's pretty obvious, but when you look at your friends, they're normally people of fairly equal status with you. Particularly the better they are, the more equal typically they're going to be. And I mean, this is, for example, why it's hard to be friends with people who are significantly more wealthy or significantly less wealthy than you are, right? And it also points out, you know, those people who are trying to climb the ladder, why you find them so irritating, because they're wanting to break out of the station they're in and go to the next rung of notoriety or attention or celebrity or wealth, and they want to move in the next bracket. Like-mindedness, right? So Aristotle seems to indicate at the end of the day that the more we are like one another in the relationship, the more connected it's going to be, the better it's going to be. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Why is so we all know is it opposite attract? Is it opposites which attract, or is it likes that attract? Let's put it this way. Aristotle in book 9 says it's likes that attract. At the end of book 8 too, with complete friendship, because these people are more alike than the other two relationships. What is it about being like the other person that allows for the connection? What is it about likeness that brings people together? Anyone think about that?
You see yourself in them.
Okay, so this is one big thing. You see yourself in them. What do you think about yourself? Good or bad?
Good. You think highly of yourself.
Okay, good. And you know, remember what Hobbes said, that everybody thinks most highly about himself, and that person, which is everybody, wants other people to see them how they see themselves, and this is a cause of conflict. This is how the issue of recognition and honors and glory creates conflict amongst people, because we all want to be seen the way we see ourselves. And of course, we see ourselves as better than everybody, not necessarily better than everybody else, but we like ourselves the most. And we want other people to like us as much as we like ourselves. And this is partly the theme of self-love, right? So the concept of self-love as it emerges in Plato and Aristotle is two related ideas. Number one, that we like ourselves most of all, although he's going to have some interesting things to say about that. We like ourselves most of all. And number two, we like things that are like us the most. And as things become less like us, we like them less and less, right? Any other reasons why we'd be attracted to things that are like us? Apart from the fact that they're like us and we like ourselves, so we like the thing that's like us. I hope that's not confusing. Having similar
say
things to talk about.
comfortability.
Okay, good. Shared values. Absolutely. You're never going to be a serious friend of someone who has values that are fundamentally different from your own. You might find them interesting. You might be interested to learn about them, but there's a limit of closeness you're going to have, because when someone has fundamentally different values than you, you're not going to be able to trust them, because what your concerns are not their concerns, and they're not going to recognize your concerns, and nor are you going to recognize theirs. Similar things to talk about. Yeah, you're going to have shared interests. Anything else? When you're like the other person? What about knowledge? How does knowledge and the issue of knowing the other person connect in with being similar to them or seeming similar? Like, here's one of the problems. Someone's going to seem similar. They might not be similar. Let's put it this way. Who do you know the most about?
I mean, wouldn't it be yourself?
Good. It's a trick question. It's yourself. So the person who's like you is going to have, or at least the impression of being like you, you're going to have an impression of knowing them well, because, well, I know myself best of all, and they're like me. So I feel like I know them, right? Do you really know them? Are they really like you? Well, I think part of the problem is the more you get to actually know someone, as opposed to just apparently know them, is the more you're going to learn that there are things that are different about them. And of course, remember, one of the Aristotle's big issues here is the more time spent, what's going to happen to people the more time they spend together? Let's say two people in a long-term relationship. What's going to happen to those two people?
They get to know each other on
And
a deeper level.
They're going to do one other thing, though, apart from just knowing each other. All right, so Cynthia and Nadira says they're going to act like each other. Let's put it this way. They may form new ways of acting just as a result of the relationship they have that is built on not some pre-existing nature or pre-existing identity, but what they develop with each other. So they're going to grow together. And so here's the problem. The human being is not a fixed target. The human being is a moving target. Where, I mean, one thing Aristotle starts to stress once he gets into this discussion is that people are constantly changing. And in a strong, complete friendship, those people are going to grow together, and they're going to become, they're not just going to know each other and know they're like one another. They're actually going to start to become more like each other because they're habituating each other to the same situation. They're habituating each other to the relationship. Okay, just a couple more things before we read here. So all human relationships are a form of exchange. Exchange means exchange going one way from self to other and from other to self, some good. And a good is just a thing that you think you want. A good is just a thing you think is beneficial to yourself. The good could be tangible, it could be intangible. And of course, Aristotle has defined these three goods as the kind of comprehensive set. There are things that are useful, there are things that are pleasurable, and there are things that are good. And here he seems to mean, maybe he means good in terms of moral and intellectual virtue. They contribute to that in some way. It seems to be what good must mean, but there's a certain ambiguity there. So remember, if there's no exchange, There's no relationship. But of course, in book 9, he's going to get into issues of perception. So I might think I'm getting something when I'm actually not, or I may think I'm getting X when I'm really getting Y, right? One person may think they're doing friends with benefits. The other person may think they're in it because of love. There lies a conflict. So one thing important about these exchanges is that what matters is both what is exchanged, but also the intention behind it. And we'll see what that means right now. So there's two forms of exchange here. They happen in different ways. The first form are these lower ones, utility and pleasure. In the first form, there we go. In the first form, the intention is different from complete friendship, which will be the second form, right? In the first form, when I give something to the other person, what am I expecting? In utility and pleasure, in relationships based on utility and pleasure, when I give someone something, what am I expecting?
You're expecting for them to give it back.
Absolutely. I'm expecting for them to give something back, number one. Number two, I'm only giving them something with the understanding that I'm getting something back, right? And then the last thing is, what I care about in this relationship is not the other person as an end in themselves. I only care about them as a means to get what I want. What I want is this good being exchanged. And the key thing is, this good is not them. This good is maybe something physically that they offer me. So you think, this is your boss. I give them labor. I don't care about I want to keep my boss happy, but not because I like him, because I don't, right? I keep him happy because my paycheck comes on and I can't worry about losing my job anytime soon, right? So you don't really care about him, right? That doesn't mean you're cruel. It doesn't mean anything like that. And maybe you develop some type of concern for the person over time, which is only natural. But your primary concern is the paycheck coming in. So Immanuel Kant, the great 18th, early 19th century German philosopher, he says for rational beings, all stand under rational beings, a human being. He dictates a certain law of human interaction. And he says that everyone ought to treat each other not merely as means, but also as an end in themselves. This is his actual language. I should just make this simpler because I don't like the way this reads. But he says this: since we're all human beings have a fundamental dignity. Why? Because they're not animals, or they're not mere animals. They're rational beings that have the power of choice. They are free to dictate their own lives. And therefore, because of that, we have a special dignity that other animals don't have. That's why we can't be a slave. That's why, morally speaking, we're equal to one another. So he says, our goal as human beings, because we are human beings, is that we should never merely treat others merely as means, but also as ends in themselves. Fatumata, I got it. What does it mean to treat? So let's clarify what he's saying here. What does it mean to treat someone as a means? What does it mean to treat someone merely as a means?
Could be for purpose.
So Aristotle talks about means and ends. Should we start with the end part?
So a tool.
Yes. So a means is a tool to get the thing you really want. You don't want the tool, you want the thing that you really want. I don't know. The fork is a means to eat your scrambled eggs. I don't really care about the fork, except insofar as it's a vehicle to get the scrambled eggs in my maw, my mouth, right? What I care about is the scrambled eggs, right? So to treat other people as a means is to treat them as a tool or an instrument, to use them to get some other thing that is the goal of all your actions, the end that you really want, right? So let's just be simple. You go to work. You treat your boss most of the time as a means to a paycheck rather than as an end in themselves, right? To treat someone as an end, this is a little tricky. To treat them as an end in themselves is to say the thing that you really want is not anything extrinsic to them that they might offer, but what you're concerned with is them as a human being. I care about them. What I want from this relationship is them. And what I am concerned with is the other person's character, because their character is what primarily constitutes, for Aristotle, who they are, right? So if we think about it for a second, if we think about, where did it go? Here. If we think about pleasure and utility, we're treating the other person as a means, and we are also being treated as a means, because what the person wants is the useful object or the useful good or the pleasurable good. And that pleasurable good or useful object is not our self, right? The pleasure may come from our body, right? But the problem with friends with, I mean, Aristotle diagnoses the problem of friends with benefits. What that jerky guy wants is not you in yourself, that you have dignity about, your own self-identity. What he wants is the pleasure that can be, let's put it this way, extracted from your body, right? But for Aristotle, your body is kind of not completely who you are. It's that character, it's that self, right? And so he's there for the pleasure. He's not there for you. He's not directly concerned about you, right? He's concerned about getting the pleasure that can be had. And that friends with benefits is even more ironic and cruel, because it gives the appearance of the other person wanting you for you, because they're in such physical proximity to you and you're engaged in like intimacy, but it's misleading. And I think that's why it's, basically hard for most people, most average person to engage in such a relationship without, as we say, developing feelings, because you don't want to just be, an object of pleasure for another person. You want to be a human being and respected as such, right? It's really quite simple. Okay. In complete friendship, the other person is treated not as a means, but as an end. That's really crucial, which is to say, each friend cares about the other person for their own sake and and particularly not what they have to offer superficially, like cash or what have you, pleasure, but for who they are. And the one interesting thing about the way in which he describes the exchange is people give freely without a notion of getting something in return, right? So that's what I would call, and not just me, but most people, a gift, right? A gift is something you give with no explicit expectation of return. When you give a gift, there's no contract that says, I just gave you such a nice gift for your birthday. You better be giving something back really nice to me. I mean, that's contrary to the spirit of a gift. However, when you work for your boss, there absolutely is a contract that says, when I worked for you, excuse me, this ain't a gift. You're giving me a paycheck every 2 weeks, because otherwise I'm not doing this job, right? So you see how a gift works. Of course, when we have decent friends and we give them a gift, they're thoughtful enough to give something back later on in some form. And of course, you've incurred kind of a debt. They've incurred a kind of debt by you giving them something. There's an implicit sense of obligation that they should do something in return. So, people make metaphors of like relationships are like we have bank accounts, and We do stuff to spend our money and to build up our capital in our bank account with other people. Everybody familiar with that kind of metaphor? Anybody talk in those terms that you have like a bank account with other people? So like if you do nice things, you get money in your bank account because you expect them at some point to do nice things back to you. On the other hand, if you are constantly asking for favors from them, you build up a kind of debt that somewhere in the future you got to pay back, right? Because and why is that? Why do you have to pay back the debt? And I mean, this is not even like a moral principle. This is like practical reality. Why do you have to pay back the debt?
I mean, you want to show the person that you're a good person. You want to reciprocate the energy that they gave you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you don't pay back the debt, they're going to stop doing the favors and they're going to stop the relationship, right? They're you know, it just doesn't work that way. It's just like economics. People's resources are finite, they're scarce, they're limited, and people can't afford to do things for other people where they don't get something in return. So nobody, once people wise up to what's going on, they just say the heck with it. I'm not going to do that anymore. And of course, this stuff goes on all the time in relationships. Okay, very quickly. So here we've got the 3 forms of friendship, and notice it's not filled in. We got to figure it out. We want to know what the object of exchange is. Is the relationship stable or unstable? Meaning, is it going to last or not? And this is connected with how long it lasts, duration. Is the person treated as a means or an end? Is the relationship complete or incomplete? Are the people like or unlike? Or are the people equal or unequal? So friendship based on utility. What's the object of exchange? What's the object of exchange?
Gifts.
Actually, no. I mean, a gift could be a physical thing, but the kind of concept of a gift has to do with giving something where there's no expectation of return. In utility, you're darn well expecting a return. It's right there. What kind of things? Let's go through this quickly. What's the object of exchange?
To give something and to get something in return. Like it
Yes.
basically, if
Now,
exchange could be.
Now the answer's sitting right there, and I'm when they say the object of exchange, we're talking about a general category of thing, right?
Goods,
The
Professor.
good, the
The
good.
goods.
Well, all 3 have goods exchanged, right? Of one kind or another.
Fresh.
Jonathan and Diego, thank you. Something useful, right? Aristotle, now that sounds stupid, right? Because everything's useful. Aristotle has a very specific meaning of useful, and it has to do with things that satisfy the basic needs of life, like the basic needs of getting by in life. Those things for him, he defines as useful. So useful things are things that satisfy basic needs. But of course, for happiness, we need much more than basic needs. Okay, is this relationship stable or unstable?
Stable.
Unstable.
It's
Unstable.
unstable.
For a whole bunch of reasons. Because their character can fluctuate, because our needs can fluctuate, and because what we have to offer can fluctuate. And maybe we just don't need what they're offering very long. Maybe we need it just once. Who knows? So therefore, the duration is going to be short. Do we treat the other person as a means or an end?
Means.
As a means. Good.
Yeah.
So therefore, we know this relationship's incomplete because it doesn't involve the other 2. Are the people more alike or more unalike, or could they be more alike or unalike? What would you expect?
Unalike.
Yeah, unalike, and why is that? That's a good answer, and then the question is why?
Because the intent behind it, they have
Because
different.
they're not similar. They're not the same, maybe.
Yeah, so the people are not the same, but why?
They have differences.
And the question is why? You're right. Absolutely. Let
They're
me,
not equal. They're not equal.
yeah, and they're not going to be equal either. Or at least they don't have to be equal, right? They could be similar. They could be alike, but they don't have to be, is the point. They're unalike because we don't care about who they are. All we care about is the good they offer. And by definition, the good they offer is something like extrinsic to them. It's not part of them. It's just something they have,
Just
right?
what they offer.
And we're not getting in this relationship for them, treating them as an end in themselves. They're just a means. So we don't care what, so long as they're providing the good, so long as it's the good we want, so long as we have sufficient level of trust, we don't really care much about them, right? When you go to the Starbucks, you don't care, the barista, you're polite to them, but you don't like, treat them like, some
And friends.
long lost brother or sister.
Like yeah.
Okay, the pleasant, friendship based on pleasure, the object of exchange is?
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Stable or unstable?
Unstable.
Unstable. 'Cause the
Stable.
people, again, we don't care about,
Unstable.
and this ties in with like and unlike and equal and unequal. We don't care about the other person directly. We care about the pleasure. And Aristotle adds another wrinkle, which is if we're talking about physical pleasure, our attraction changes all the time. The person who looks attractive is the person who's in front of us at the moment, right? Something like that, because they're the one that's attainable. And of course, we constantly have all these desires. All right, so the duration is likely short. The other person is a means. It's obviously incomplete. Complete. They have the potential to be more
Right.
unlike and
Okay.
more unequal, right? And the more unequal we are with the other person, then there's the issue of how the exchange works, and we have to compensate. If we're exchanging with a superior person, guess what? They're giving us less, and we're giving them more. What's the object of exchange in complete friendship?
Goods.
Yeah, it's not just any good, it's the good.
Virtuous. Virtuous too.
Yeah, I would say the best definition for what's exchanged is virtuous deeds of some kind, virtuous actions conferred on the other person. Now let's go back to this model.
Yeah.
Remember this whole model. In the second form of complete friendship, my intent is to give without expecting return.
Uh-huh.
But think about it. When I perform a virtuous action, what am I doing for myself? What is that the definition of?
I'm sorry, say that again.
When I perform a virtuous action for the other person, what am I doing for myself?
You're happy.
Yes.
Because you don't have any, you don't expect anything.
So the other person doesn't even have to give you anything back because you're doing something that is intrinsically, it's beneficial for them, but it's intrinsically maybe even more beneficial to you as Aristotle understands it.
Exactly.
Right? Because for Aristotle, everybody's happiness is really dependent on you taking control of your own actions. So this person is getting something and you're benefiting them, but the real moment of happiness is when you're doing it for yourself and you're in control of those things in your life that you can control. So the funny thing about virtuous deeds or virtuous actions is they're good in themselves. So this one's going to be more stable. It's going to last longer. And that has to do with the fact he says some interesting things that people with good character, their character is more stable. Their personality doesn't change as much or as fast. And therefore, if you're in this relationship and the people are their personalities are stable, why would you ever end this relationship voluntarily? It's benefiting you, at least as Aristotle describes it. And there's no reason, there's no rationale for ending it. So it would perpetuate itself into the future. And of course, the very existence of this relationship, as he describes it, He says it's really the only form of friendship. It's true friendship. He says these two forms are friendship incidentally. So they're not really, they're more like a certain types of acquaintanceship. He's just using the same word. And complete friendship is true friendship. And as part of the, depiction of complete friendship, he's making another claim that only good people can be true friends. Only good people can be true friends. And it has something to do with the fact that what you like in the other person is the other person and their character. And he seems to, Aristotle has a claim that nobody likes what's bad for them. They only like what they think is good for themselves, right? So if you knew something was bad, you wouldn't possibly like it. You wouldn't possibly want it, right? And so many people have disagreed with Aristotle. So you're kidding me? There's honor among thieves. Bad people can be friends. They can be intimate. And of course, Aristotle doesn't see this as just the intimacy as a byproduct of the decency or the virtue of these people. Okay. So let's go here.
Book 9.
All right. So we'll read what we can and then we'll call it a night. Aristotle opens up book 9. I'll just read this little phrase here. In all heterogeneous friendships. Now he doesn't say heterosexual, he says heterogeneous. In all heterogeneous friendships. What does the word heterogeneous mean?
I think that means natural genius. You didn't have to learn from anyone. Just
Smart.
guessing.
No. So it doesn't have to do with intelligence.
No?
Homogeneous, some things are homogeneous and some things are heterogeneous.
Homo mean one, hetero mean two, right?
Close, very close. Homogeneous, homo has to do with the same and hetero has to do with different, right? Okay. So if you think about heterosexual relationship, yeah, in that case, it ends up being two, but it's two different types of human beings of two different sexes that are part of the relationship, right? They seek the opposite, right? So in a heterogeneous relationship, the people are what? The same or different?
Hetero, they are different.
Yes.
Different.
So a homogeneous relationship would be what? A relationship between two people who are the same.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. The theme that's lurking here is the issue of the heterogeneity of our relationships. Difference is, for Aristotle, is difference a good thing or a bad thing in relationships?
It's a bad thing?
Bad.
For the most part, it's a bad thing. And it's a thing that undermines the possibility of relationships, right? Of course, there are things you can learn from other people. And if you can learn from them, it means it's something that you don't have or you don't know, which means they're different, right? So there are different degrees of heterogeneity. There are massive differences between people, and then there are more minor differences. Is there such a thing as a perfectly homogeneous relationship?
No.
No. Is this a good thing or a bad thing that there's no homogeneous relationship?
Bad thing.
Yeah, let's put it this way. It's a problem. And why is that? Because everybody is what?
Everybody's different.
Everybody is
Thank
different.
you. This is what he's getting at. Everybody's different. And no matter how much you think you're the same with the other person, you're still different in some way, shape, or form. And that's the cause of some problems. And yes, there's a possibility of degrees of change, but of course, that's all contingent on the details of the relationship, right? Is there one homogeneous relation? I think he starts getting the point where the more similar you are, the better the relationship is. So the less heterogeneity, the better it's going to be. Is there one relationship that's actually homogeneous, and what would it be? Everybody's different, but you are
Unique.
Yeah, we're all unique. And that's okay. Jonathan said it. The one homogeneous relationship you can have is your relationship with yourself,
Oh,
right? And so later in book 9, he raises the specter of number one, can we be friends with ourselves? What's his answer to that question?
yes.
Absolutely. So the
Oh.
first question is, can we have this relationship? And the answer is absolutely. And why is that? Because as thinking human beings, we have a cognitive relationship to our own self. We reflect not just on other people, but we reflect on ourselves, and we have the ability to carry on a relationship with ourselves because of our ability to reflect on our actions, to reflect on what we've said. We have a kind of permanent dialogue with ourselves, and therefore by that logic we set up a kind of relationship with ourselves. One thing friends do is we act and we live in the world, and our friends are our audience, and not only the audience of our actions, but they judge our actions. Well, it's also true of ourselves. We both do things, but we're also the audience to our own actions, and we judge our own actions. And of course, we're not always the best judge of our own actions, but we have this ability as humans who are conscious and who think to have this relationship with ourselves that Aristotle is identifying as very significant in some way, shape, or form. And so Cynthia says you must love yourself to love others, and Aristotle is pretty much going to say that in a complicated way eventually. So we'll get there.
Professor, let me can I interject really quick. So then so basically with Aristotle, if you must love yourself to love others, but then you have,
To love yourself requires something very specific. It's not just an act of will, like saying, oh, I want to love myself. You have to be able to do something to love yourself. And the self-love comes, at least there's two forms. There's a good form of self-love that looks like narcissism, and there's a bad form of excuse me, I've just confused everything. There's a bad form of self-love that looks like narcissism and egoism, someone who wants to be really cool. And then there's a good form of self-love where you have like a kind of, you might say, a complete friendship with yourself, right? And this raises the specter of the most complete friendship would be of people who are most alike. And who are you most alike with? Well, that's yourself, because you're absolutely identical with yourself. You share the same experiences. Think about connections with other people. You share a set of experiences because you've lived with them. It's not just that you talk about things in your past that you've done with others that you identify. It's that you have done things with that person and shared directly in those experiences. Well, who have you done that more with than yourself since the day you were conscious of having experiences? You've been living with yourself and sharing experiences. And since you're the one you're most familiar with, that familiarity breeds a kind of satisfaction, because you see here, understanding and loving are really connecting. I mean, why are you comfortable with yourself? Because you understand yourself. I'm sorry. So you were saying that to love others, you have to love yourself. What was there? You had a question? Was there something additional?
'Cause what I was trying to remember was, you know how certain people need to be surrounded by others for that self-gratification, where they need somebody to constantly tell them they're good and
Okay.
feel. So where does that relate to this?
Okay, this is exactly what Aristotle talks about in the bad form of self-love, right? And he's already mentioned it with the politician in the Three Lives, where he says they seek out recognition so that they may think that they're good people. Let's go back. This is 191. He sets this up way back in the beginning. Oh, look at that. So here's where he says it. I'll make this a little bigger.
Chapter 5.
Yes. He says, further, people seem to pursue honor.
Uh-huh.
Now, pursue honor, let's put it in our words. They seek out attention from others. They seek out flattery from others. They seek other people to say, oh, you look so great tonight, honey, or whatever it is. They pursue honors so that they may be convinced that they themselves are good. Now, there's so much stated, packed in this kind of pithy little statement here, right? If they need to be convinced of their goodness, of their virtue, it raises the specter that they're not sure they think that they're so good, which raises the specter that they're probably not so good, right? And of course, Aristotle doesn't get into a discussion of this is what a good person looks like, this is what a bad person looks like. These are the rules to follow. It's more nuanced than that. But I think the point is this, that Aristotle basically let me put it this way. A decent person basically knows what's right. And when they've messed up, when they've done something morally wrong, they know it and they feel bad. They feel guilty. They feel shame, right? And for Aristotle, even the base person who does the wrong thing, they know that they've done the wrong thing. Well, he doesn't spend much time talking about people who are ignorant of what the wrong thing is. As adults, for the most part, we know 99% of life, we kind of know. There are certainly gray areas. There's no doubt about that. But so this person feels guilty precisely because they know they've done the wrong thing. And then they seek out the attention of the other people or other persons. Normally it's not one, normally it's many people, so that they can get adulation as a way of distracting themselves from the fact that they know that they're less than virtuous, that they're base. The word Aristotle uses is base, right? So what Aristotle is doing is giving a kind of psychoanalysis of why that person who has the gabillions of friends on Facebook and is trying to get attention from others, he's giving a rationale as to why they're doing it, the underlying motivation. And the answer is they don't feel good about themselves because they know that they're not living up to the expectations that they know are the right ones to live up to, and for whatever reason, whatever character flaw, and they seek out the attention of others as a way of kind of like covering it over, right? And of course, they don't care about the other people for themselves. They just care about the flattery they're getting. You might say, you could put it this way. Some people who feel guilty and ashamed, they drink. Some of them do drugs. Some of them play video games. Well, this person seeks out attention from other people as a way of kind of suppressing their own lack of self-worth. And the lack of self-worth comes from the awareness that they're not doing the right things for themselves.
Got it.
And because he's going to expand on this, he expands on it in book 9. All right, 922.
Professor, can I ask something?
Yes, yes, yes.
So we know that there's people who, yeah, go out there and they say things like, I'm not good enough, and they're looking for that, you know, response from someone. But can, like myself, can I say I am a good person, and can that be taken as like true honesty, like I'm really a good person, or is that kind of overstepping? Do you understand my question?
You know, so like
Like,
Aristotle and the Greeks, they're not really into shyness and humility. The Greeks, when he says human happiness and living virtuously, he's talking about human excellence. The Greeks are really caught up in human excellence. When they go to a football game or a wrestling match or the Olympics, whatever they would do, or boxing, because they watch boxing, they want to see the best. And if someone really is the best, I don't think their culture, they don't seem to have a problem with someone who says so. The problem, the catch comes when, the best is just a word. I'm good. That's just words, right? For the Greeks, your decency, your virtue, your excellence, it's shown in what you do, right? It's manifest in so it's like, good is as good does, or stupid is as stupid does. You are what you do. You're the sum of your actions, right? So the cat, it's just like anything else. If someone is going to trash talk Michael Jordan, they better go and score on him, or they better go defend him from dunking the ball on their head. Otherwise, the trash talk is just words. So he raises this issue of exchange here, and then we'll read. So here he says, it is, notice how Aristotle writes. It's really confusing. He uses a double negative. It is not unclear. What is he saying? It is clear, is what he's saying. It is not unclear then that one should not give back the same things to all people, or all things, even to one's father, just as one does not offer all sacrifices, even to Zeus. So he's making a comment on how exchange works. And this exchange is really a kind of form of justice. If you remember in the Republic, the topic of justice comes up when Cephalus, the old guy of the household who's feeling guilt because he's done bad things, he's making offerings to the gods because he doesn't want to go to hell, right? Socrates asks him, what is justice? Because you're an old wise man, Cephalus. And he says, justice is telling the truth and giving back to things what they've given to you, right? And Socrates immediately responds saying, no, I don't think you should give back. If your neighbor gives you their weapon and then the neighbor goes crazy and becomes a madman, you shouldn't give the weapon back to him because he's crazy. He's going to shoot someone, or he's going to, whatever the weapon is, right? So exchange is not necessarily happen in terms of equality, and different things get different people get different things depending on the nature of the relationship, depending on who they are. And if you think about justice, justice is a form of exchange. People do things, and based on the rules, they get rewards and punishments. And depending on how they act and who they are, they get different things. Some people get rewards, some people get punishments, right? So friendship is going to play out the same way. What people get depends on who they are and the details of the relationship. And exchange, while it's how should we put it? It's reciprocal. The equality of it manifests in not just in what's given, but also the circumstances and the two people, the nature of the two people involved. All right, can I have a volunteer read for us, starting with chapter 3? Who could read for us?
I'll read. I'll start the reading.
Great, go for it, Tashana.
but there is perplexity also concerning whether or not to dissolve friendships with those who do not remain the same as
Okay,
they were.
let's great. So there's a perplexity concerning whether or not to dissolve friendships with those who do not remain the same as they were, right? One step. So what is Aristotle addressing here? People who don't remain the same as they were. We're talking about change. And the real world, human beings are in a constant state of development. Circumstances are constantly changing. Relationship is like a moving target. People are like a moving target. They're not static.
Well, Professor, I think when people change for the worse, that's when relationship gets dissolved.
Okay. So so he hasn't said anything about how they change. What are the ways they can change in general? You just mentioned one of them.
I don't think they have to just change for the worse. It could just be change, any type of change. You can be changing your life to not being careless to more responsible, and that can change, the whole aspect of the friendship.
Yeah, sure. So there are circumstances that can change, but here he is specifically talking about the
The
person.
compatibility, maybe they're not compatible anymore.
Right.
So this is
Okay.
it's going to affect compatibility, right? So let's just be clear. The change could be for the better, or the change could be for the worse. We
Yeah.
don't know. So there's a perplexity. What does he mean by perplexity in this issue?
Oh, like being unsure.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a mystery, a little confusion. It's unclear. It's not clear what the answer is. It's not clear what the answer is, whether or not to dissolve a friendship. Dissolve meaning end, right? Dissolve friendships with those who do not remain the same as they were, right? Okay, so this is all going to deal what he's talking about in chapter 3 with change and whether the relationship should continue or it should end. And the point is, as human beings in these relationships, we have to make choices about these things. And obviously, think about it. The desire for friendship rises quickly, but the reality of it does not, right? We all want to believe that our relationships are going to work out. We're not going to want to dissolve them, right? In a lot of cases. But well, let's see what he says about it. You want to keep going, Tashana?
Since people are friends with a view what is either useful or is it nothing strange to dissolve the friendship when these no longer exist?
Okay, let's answer that question. He says, people in friendships based on the useful or the pleasant, right? Friendship on utility, friendship based on pleasure. Is it nothing strange to dissolve the friendship when these goods no longer exist?
It's not strange, no.
Okay, so that's Cynthia's answer. What do other people think? Is it strange to dissolve? Is it unusual to dissolve the relationship when these goods disappear?
Well, it depends if you're there for the means.
No, but look at how he's defining these in terms of those two friendships right now. What do other people think? Is it unusual to end the relationship when the goods dry up, when they no
No.
longer exist?
No, it's not unusual.
No, it's called business, right? But of course, I think another part of us, to say that the other person is a means, I mean, we never treat anybody completely as an end because we always need things from them, but we never treat everybody just as a means. I mean, unless we're really kind of sociopathic or something. So we're not going to want to end things, like, oh, I got what I want. I'm going to ghost them now. I think everybody knows you just like disappear, right? So most people say, no, it's not unusual. We would end the relationship. So let's see what Aristotle says. Keep
For
going.
they used to be friends of these things, When they lose them, it is with good reason that they no longer love each other. But someone could level an accusation if another who was fond of him on account of utility or pleasure was pretending to be fond of him on account of his character. For as we said in the beginning, most differences arise among friends when need to put on my glasses, when the sort of friends they suppose themselves to be is not the same as the sort of friends they actually are.
Okay. So he's introduced two wrinkles here that he really hasn't delved into up until now. Number one, we discover that friends can be in heterogeneous relationships such that maybe person X is in it for pleasure, but person Y is in it for utility, right? There's no reason why, for example, both have to be in it for the same good. Although if it's complete friendship, they do have to be in for it for the same good. Because if one person in complete is engaging in a true friendship or trying to, and the other person is there for pleasure, it's not going to work. And it can't be, it will not, it won't be a complete friendship. Okay. The other thing is deception, which is to say, I think I'm engaging in a complete friendship, but it turns out that the other person only wants pleasure. Now, deception happens in two ways. How is the deception working in this instance? Who's doing the deceiving?
The person who is in the relationship to get what they want out of it.
Okay, good. So there's one person who's deceiving the other person so that they can get what they want, right? Very sneaky, right? And if they hadn't used the deception, the logic then is they wouldn't be able to get what they want from that person. So since they sense that or know that, they use the deception, they pretend to be in one type of relationship when it's really another. And I think the most obvious thing here, the most obvious conclusion is that the person here in this description is pretending to be committed to, hopes of a complete friendship when in fact it's not, right? So, I mean, here, like one person thinks they're engaged in a love relationship and the other person just wants sex, but the only way they're going to get it is if they tell the person that they really love them, even though it's not true, it's a deception. And that's one example. We could think of others, but that's the kind of easy one. You want to keep going, Tashana?
Yes, when someone is deceived, then and assumes that he is loved on account of his character, even though the other person does no such thing, he should blame himself. But when he is deceived by the other who is pretending, it is just to accuse the deceiver, and more so than to accuse those who are counterfeiting currencies, insofar as the wrongdoing concerns a more honorable thing.
Okay, so he identifies two forms of deception here. Notice the first one, when someone is deceived, then and assumes that they are loved on the account of their character, even though the other person does no such thing. They're really only and the word love is a little bit misleading here because we think of complete friendship being the only one where there's real love. But here the word philia is being used and translated as love, right? So this isn't real love. This isn't true love. They're not being loved on account of their character. They're being loved for pleasure or utility, right? To be loved on account of your character, what kind of relationship would that be? Which one of the three? Diego says complete question mark. Yes or no? To be loved on account of your character.
Yes, complete friendship.
Absolutely. So what's Aristotle really saying? This person thinks that they're in a complete friendship when they're not. Who's at fault here, though? Who's doing the deceiving here?
The person.
Yes. What do you call this? What kind of deception is it?
Backstab.
Self-deception. Look at it again. When someone is deceived, why are they deceived? They're not deceived in this instance because the other person is trying to deceive them. They're deceived because they want to believe they're being loved for their character, right? So this ties back into this issue of complete desire for friendship arises quickly, but the reality of it doesn't, right? This person is wishing for complete friendship, and therefore they're willing to deceive themselves to believe that they're actually being loved for who they are when they're not, right? In the other example, he makes it very clear. He says, but when he is deceived by the other who is pretending. See, in the first example, the other person's not pretending to love them as a complete friend, right? It's the person is the other person is deceiving themselves. So who do you blame when you deceive yourself? Who do you blame? This is simple.
Yourself.
Yeah, yourself. And when the other person deceives you, who do you blame? You
You
blame
blame them, but can you blame yourself too? Because you
well, so
kind of knew.
there's a fine line between deception and self-deception, right? In actually, there's a section in Plato's Republic where he talks about lies and who's responsible for the lie. Is it the person telling the lie, or is it the person receiving the lie? And in the Republic, Plato blames the lie on the person who accepts the lie as true, because who's the person who makes the final judgment about what's true and false? You do. And if you've accepted a lie from the other person, it means you have accepted their judgment about what's true or not and not used your own. And so you're partially responsible for having allowed yourself to be deceived, right? So someone can try to deceive you, but at least Plato there is saying that all deception is a form of self-deception, in that it's up to you to not rely on the other person or the authority of the other person for what's true or not, and that you always need to use your own judgment to discriminate what's true from what's false, and you can't depend on other people. Cynthia says agreed. Of course, in life you have to depend on other people. That's the only catch. You have to trust. You got to trust Dr. Fauci when he says something, or you got to trust your husband or wife, or to capture this situation, what Ronald Reagan said: trust but verify, right? You trust, but then you look under the cards to see what they are, and you make sure they are what they say they are. Okay.
Yeah, I like that one.
I like it too.
Yeah.
Trust but verify. I like that.
And of course, there's always situations where you're forced to just trust and have some faith. But I mean, you realize most of the time in life, you don't, just like this issue with the lie, you just don't put yourself in other people's hands that way, right? Because you're giving them a power over you. And the funny thing about people getting power over other people is when they have it, they tend to use it, they tend to exploit it. And when they don't have it, they tend to act properly. So if someone pretended and deceived you, you would blame them. And he talks about counterfeiting currency, right? And this is the currency of the exchange, right? And the currency that's being counterfeited is the claim that, oh, he's pretending to be a complete friend when he's not. Tashana, you want to keep going?
Yes, but if someone accepts another person as good and that other becomes corrupt or seems so, must he still love him?
What's the answer to that?
I got it. But
if someone accepts another person as good and the other person becomes corrupt or seems so, must we still love them?
I think so.
What do you think Aristotle says?
I think he says yes.
Any other thoughts?
Because you love you're loving the person, you're not loving the action.
That's assuming that they can be separated. He's got an interesting answer to this question. Let's find out what it is.
Or is it not possible, if indeed not everything is lovable, but only the good?
Okay, for Aristotle, the only thing that is lovable is what is good. You can't, what is he saying? You cannot love a bad person for themselves. You maybe you can hope for them to get better, right? So this is a complicated argument, and you may not agree with what he's saying here. And of course, we all have a kind of empathy with people who are struggling and a belief that they can be better. And it may have something to do with the degree of corruption of their soul. Like, is it salvageable or is it not? Right? You gonna keep going, Tashana?
For what is base is neither lovable nor ought to be loved, since one must not be a lover of what is based on make oneself like a base person. And it has been said that like is friend or like. Must one then immediately dissolve the friendship? Or should one not do this in every case, but only in the case of those who corruption is incurable?
Okay, so he's already, with all these questions, he's already suggested the answer. If someone becomes more corrupted in their character, should we stay friends with them? Or should we dissolve the relationship?
Dissolve the relationship.
Dissolve the relationship.
But Professor, if the person is becoming corrupt, that doesn't mean that that person's corruption is affecting me.
Okay, Carrie. Got it. Well, I think it probably would. I mean, if you're really in a relationship with them, he doesn't just say dissolve though. He gives a two-part answer. Or should one not do this in every case, but only in the case of those whose corruption is incurable?
Horrible. Yeah.
If their corruption is curable, what should we do?
Not dissolve the friendship.
Exactly. We should hang in there. And so what is the function of complete friendship? It's pretty clear that the performing of virtuous deeds results in making each other better. And there seems to be therefore an obligation to try to make each other better if you think the person is capable of being made better. And of course, this is a judgment call. It's not an easy question to answer.
So that means you're pointing out someone else's faults, like to help them.
It could be. I mean, I would suppose that in trying to help someone else, the first thing you'd have to do is acknowledge what the issue is to them. And of course, part of being a friend is going to be being honest with them. I mean, he talks about sometimes being a real friend is speaking the truth. He talks about the virtue of friendliness in the section on the moral virtues. And one aspect of the virtue of friendliness is the willingness to be honest with a friend. And of course, in the short term, that's painful for both of you. It doesn't help you out, but in the long term, it's beneficial to them. And if it ends up being beneficial to them, they're going to appreciate that you've done them a favor in the big picture. Of course, life is messy, right? Sometimes you say things that you're saying it for the best reasons, but it doesn't always go over the right way. So these are tricky questions.
And as for those who can be set aright, one must come to their aid, more as regards their character than their property.
So
Insofar,
notice he says you have, I'm sorry, you have
Yeah.
an obligation, you must, right? The solidarity of human beings, we are in this together. You have an obligation to help make them better. This is an interesting claim here. He doesn't say these kind of things often, like you must do something.
insofar as doing the former is better than belongs more to friendship. I don't understand that sentence.
Oh, hold on here. Let me just read it through because he doesn't fill everything out. He says, and as for those who can be set aright, people who can be made better, one must come to their aid in terms of their character more than their property, right? So we're talking about someone, we're not concerned with their wealth, we're concerned with their well-being as a human being. Insofar as doing the former belongs more to friendship, doing the former is coming to their aid regard to character. Remember, Aristotle does this. I know it's 10 o'clock at night and we're talking the former and the latter, and we'll stop in just a second here. So the former is the former thing before, and the latter is the later thing. So coming to one's aid in terms of their character belongs more to complete friendship. It's more consistent with what friendship really is, or the essence of friendship, more than coming to their aid in terms of their property. Yep, here we are. You want to keep going?
Sorry, Professor, I had to step away.
Sure.
Am I up to chapter 4 yet? No.
Right here at the top of the page, and then we'll finish with this.
But he who dissolves the friendship in such a circumstance would not be held to be doing anything strange, for he was not originally a friend to a person of this sort. When it is not possible to rehabilitate someone who has changed, he keeps his distance. But if one person in the friendship should remain the same, while the other becomes more decent and in fact greatly surpass him in virtue, ought the latter to treat the former friend as a friend? Or is it impossible?
Okay, so let's just clarify. He's kind of running through some what ifs, right? So in one situation, he's talking about the issue of change and whether we continue or dissolve relationships. And of course, the problem is our lives are, let's just kind of sum up with this, because we'll stop banging our heads against the wall here. Our lives consist of constant change. Our circumstances of our life change. The needs of our lives change. We are changing as human beings because we're growing, and we're not just getting older. Our characters are changing. And this creates a great problem for friendships. It puts a tremendous pressure on our relationships, because what we need from the other person is a specific thing. But if they're changing, it raises the specter that they might not be able to provide that thing, right? So the solutions are really simple. As people change, do we stay with the relationship and try to rectify it or make it better, or do we abandon it and dissolve it? And obviously, Aristotle says yes and no, both and. It all depends on the circumstances. It depends on the details, what we do. He's leaving it up to us, right? He's not giving us a simple rule of thumb. So in the first instance, he's talking about people who seem to become more corrupt. Now he's talking about a friend who becomes superior to you in virtue. What do you, and you're the lesser person. What do you do about that? You want to keep it going to Sean, and we'll finish up?
Yes. Yes, Travis, give me a minute. Or is this possible? And where the difference is great, this impossibility becomes especially clear. For example, in childhood friendships, for if the one person remains a child in its understanding, whereas the other should be a most excellent man in this very respect. How could they be friends if they neither are pleased by the same things or delight in and are pained by the same things? For they will also not find these things in each other. But without such shared pleasures and pains, they would not be friends, since it would be impossible for them to live together. But what concerns these matters was spoken of.
Okay, right? Uh, Childhood friendships. Why are children friends? Because they're in proximity to one another, like the image depicted in The Money, right? Then they're going to grow up and they're going to discover, they're not just going to change, they're going to start to discover who they are. And they might well discover that um, the friendship just is not going to persist because they discover that they're different, right? And that the initial thing that brought them together was simply proximity to one another. So you see something interesting here, that friendship is about shared pleasures and pains. And this has to do with two things. It has to do, one, with having the same experiences. If we've shared the same pleasures and pains, the same experiences, we're going to be able to relate better to one another. We're going to have a connection. And what the interesting thing is, the thing he sees as the connection, what are we sharing? What is that the nature of that connection? The nature of it is a sharing of common pleasures and pains. We've gone through the same experiences. I don't know. We've both uh, done this. We've gone to Paris, or we had a mother die, or we had a wonderful relationship, or we both like doing the same things. We watch movies together or drink a beer, whatever it happens to be. But there's another element to the pleasures and pains, which is not everybody finds the same things painful, and not everybody finds the same things pleasurable. Our tolerance for pleasure and pain, what we find pleasurable and what we find painful, is partly the result of our upbringing and our habituation. Uh, for one person, reading a book is a pleasure. For another person, it's a pain in the ass, right? So what's interesting is, not only are we going to have similar experiences, but we're going to find the same things pleasurable and the same things distasteful. And if you think about what morality does, is it codes things as good and bad. And it says this thing is good and therefore it should be pleasurable, and this thing is bad and therefore it should be painful. So what we're really talking about is this communion of pleasures and pains. And of course, the problem is other people are different. They're not going to have exactly the same pleasures and pains as you. And the only person who's exactly the same in terms of their pleasures and pains is whom?
Yourself.
Yes, yourself. And going forward here, he's going to start talking about the relationship with yourself and this issue of self-love. But we should wrap it up now. Any last questions, comments, issues before we call it a night?
Well, Professor, wait, there's a question I was asked earlier about like self-love. I think Cynthia asked this about like, you said there was like an extra component because you can't just say you just love yourself. What is that? Because it's not clear. I'm trying to understand.
Okay. Yeah. So Aristotle talks about it in I think chapters 5 and chapter 8. So for Aristotle, real self-love, true good self-love, just like there's friendship and then there's real friendship or true friendship, which he calls complete. There is self-love that turns out not to be real love of self. It's a kind of narcissism, a kind of egoism. And then there's real self-love, which is positive and good and something you want to have. Whereas narcissism is obviously something that's not a trait that is appealing to people for the obvious reasons. So the good self-love is built on a foundation of someone who is virtuous. And he makes the argument, and we can disagree with his take, but that the person who truly loves themselves is also a decent human being. They're a virtuous human being. And the reason they love themselves is precisely this. It's not just that they, we all have a natural level of self-love, but this good form of self-love is the result of people having done the right things. And when they observe themselves, they know they have done the right things, and therefore they feel good about themselves. And because they feel good about themselves, they have a sense of self-worth, right? If we remember the model of the soul, reason is supposed to regulate the passions. Reason is supposed to be the master of the soul, the kind of ruler of the soul. And when reason rules in the soul, you have a virtuous person. And they do the right things because reason dictates the right things to do, whatever they happen to be. And therefore, you have a sense of esteem of yourself, a sense of self-worth, because you as a human being should live a certain type of life, and you've lived up to it. Now, let's flip it around. The person who hasn't done the right thing, they feel a sense of guilt. They feel a sense of shame. And the feeling of shame and guilt is precisely a feeling of lack of self-esteem, because you know what the right thing to do is, but you haven't been able to do it. And you look at yourself, you are your own audience, and you feel ashamed for yourself, which is to say you're looking down on yourself negatively, right? I mean, that's part of what guilt, that's part of what shame is. You're you're looking at yourself and making a judgment of your own lack of self-worth, or your own lack of worth, because you're aware that you haven't lived up to the expectations that a decent person should have lived up to. So the person who loves themselves, they've done the right thing, and therefore they can look at themselves and say, look, this is how I'm supposed to live. I have achieved that. Therefore, I have a general sense of self-esteem or self-worth because I've done the right things, right? And I can go to sleep at night feeling good about myself. And the one example he gives, and that Hannah Arendt gives, is a murderer, right? And the murderer is a good example because you just know that's wrong. And anyone with a conscience, having committed murder, is going to feel guilt and shame, because they've not just done something wrong, but they've killed a being like themselves without justification. That's what murder is. And that's one of the worst things as a human being you can do. And so they describe it as literally you can't live with yourself because you're living with a murderer, which is to say everyone has a low opinion of murderers. And okay. Yeah. So the person who has self-love has to do the right thing. They have to live virtuously. And that's exactly why they love themselves, because they can esteem themselves, because they have a sense of self-worth because they've done the right thing. Okay. Questions, comments? I take it we'll call it a night here. All righty. So thank
Okay,
you all.
good night, Professor.
Thank you all for hanging in there, and I will have this posted tomorrow morning.
Please, okay,
Thank
good
you,
night.
Professor. And do you know, Professor, do you know when you'll have the midterms graded?
I hope by the end of this week, I should have them graded.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll make some comments, general comments for everyone's benefit. And Diego, attendance. Yes, I did. So let me get you down right now and we'll call it a night. Got you. Okay. All righty. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great night.
Professor,
Thank
did you
for
count me
hanging
as with attendance?
Oh, and that's Ellie Esther. Right?
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I finished my other class and then I came straight back here.
Okay.
But I'm good.
I got you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
you.
Take care.
Have a
Bye,
great
Professor.
night.
Oh, so Professor, as for the homework, are you gonna post that up? right?